I know a lot of you are fourth graders who are here trying to fill in the spaces of your mission programs and mission projects. I hope that the information that you get today gives good fodder for thinking, critical thinking, and examining mission life closely. The building that you saw out there is the oldest building in Santa Cruz. It's the only building that was that's still standing today that was a part of the Santa Cruz mission, and it was built for the purpose and used for the purpose of homes for Native families who were at the mission, who were, of course, the majority of the population of a mission. So today we're going to look at their story, their daily life. We're going to take a micro lens. We're going to focus in on just a couple of objects that would have come from a domestic setting, from a home, and think about what those objects tell us about daily life in the mission. All right. So my name is Julie Sidel. This is Daily Life in the Mission in 13 Objects. And due to the weather, I'm not sure that we're going to cover 13 objects, but the good news is we can continue with more of these live stream events. Hopefully next week we'll get to the rest of them. And welcome aboard. While we're looking at these objects, I want you to also be asking yourself some questions along the way. First, how did life change for California Indian people after the Spanish arrived? And in what ways did traditional culture continue or persist through the Spanish era and the mission system? Let's grab one of these objects and start taking a look. All right. Hopefully you can see this one here. Let's take a look at it. And you can be thinking about what is this object made out of? That's a good place to start. And I'll give you a hint in the case of this one. Its color tells you about its material. So this is a bright coppery color, and in fact it's made of copper. And it's a pot for cooking, or a cazo. Now in the mission era, we would find these in different sizes and shapes for different purposes, big vats for industrial purposes, or a small one like this for cooking in a domestic setting in a home. My question for you is, who would have brought this object into the mission? What cultural tradition would this come from? So if you said the Spanish, you'd be correct. Some of these were made in Mexico. You can see the hammering, perhaps you can see the hammering effect, the little circles on the bottom. So these were made by artisans, by craftsmen throughout Mexico, and they are still being produced today. Really, really gorgeous copper objects. Let's take a look at another object, and I'm going to start using the word artifact. So an artifact is an object that has cultural significance, that's connected to a culture. And the same question is going to go for this one. What is it made out of? A basket like this. And whose tradition would this come from? Would this be something that the Spanish would have brought in? Is this something that Native people would have brought in? And if you're thinking of California Indians, you'd be right. So basketry skills are something that California Indian people have been famous for. And during the mission era, people are still making baskets, they're weaving, and they're still developing new basketry styles. So mission life, something that we're noticing right here in terms of containers for food. Mission life is a blending of cultures. Now, some of you might have noticed that there are tags or numbers on our objects. These are all artifacts that come from our museum here within the Adobe building. And so each of these museum artifacts is inventoried and curated and cared for, and they each have their own accession number. That's what we're seeing there. All right, people notice the hammering. I'm going to show you another piece. This one's also metal. You can see the accession number in white there. And so what tradition would this come from? It's not copper, but it's metal. This is a comal, and this was also something that the Spanish would have brought into the mission system. There's no metal here in Central California that's used until the Spanish arrive. And a comal like this, well, what's it used for? Perhaps cooking some tortillas. We'll put those on our comal. And so this is a common food that we would be seeing in the missions. And did Ohlone people, were they eating tortillas? Who invented tortillas? Are you thinking about that one at home? It gets a little complex because tortillas were invented in Mesoamerica. People down there were growing corn for over 7,000 years, and there was a tortilla tradition. The Spanish learned that, and the Spanish brought it into California. So have any of you eaten a meal with a tortilla this week? It's still part of a really common part of our California culture today. It started during the mission era. Let's look at some other food. It may look like food. Do you know the name of this one, folks out there? If you're thinking abalone, you're right. And of course, it would come from the ocean. California Indian people along the coast are great divers. You might be using a whale rib bone to pop these off of the rocks down there. You're not going to find them on the beach. I mean, you might find them on the beach, but you're not going to look for them on the beach. You're going to look for them in the ocean because then it will have the animal, the abalone inside. And what would we do with that? Of course, it would be food. Have any of you out there ever eaten abalone? It's something that today we would consider gourmet seafood. But for Ohlone people, for people in this region, it was daily fare. And in fact, if you said the word abalone right there, you are speaking in Ohlone language because that's probably the only word that we commonly use in English that actually stems from an Ohlone language word. Abalone, they do it, they got it. Once again, we can think about mission life as a blending of cultures. New foodways are coming into the picture. But people are also continuing their traditional foodways and food culture in the missions to some extent. All right, let's check out another artifact. I got a fun one over here. All right, so this is a small piece. I'm trying to lay it up there. Made out of bone. So what's your guess as to where it would come from, whose tradition it would come from? I'll give you a hint. It's for playing a game. It's a gaming piece. And this is a bone piece for a game. Sometimes it's called peon. Guessing games were a part of the tradition of California Indians and actually stemmed throughout a lot of North America. People were playing these games for thousands of years before the Spanish arrived. They're still playing them in the mission system during the times of the mission, and people are still playing these games today. They are also gambling games. The stakes are very high. Here's another game. So, whose tradition would this come from? Does anybody recognize this playing deck? Yeah, it's a little bit different than typical playing cards that we have, known as the baraja deck. If you look at some of the suites, they are similar to what we know and yet different. Here's one with clubs. And when they say clubs, those are clubs with really beautiful illustrations in a lot of cases also. So people play with the baraja deck. Today they were playing it during the mission times. Who brought this tradition into the missions? So this would be a game that the Spanish would play. The Padres played chess, checkers, and perhaps some card games. A lot of the baraja games are gambling games that the soldiers introduced, and California Indian people were playing these as well as their traditional games in the missions. Mission life, a blending of cultures. How we doing over there, Paul? You'll notice that I'm wearing gloves while I'm doing this work. These might be a really common fashion statement in these days. As a matter of fact, they're also standard practice when handling artifacts. And so these gloves are doing double duty for us today as I bring out another artifact. And so we can look at this one, the handle and the point, and you can see these sharp parts. First of all, Spanish or Ohlone, Native American, who would have brought this into the mission system. It's metal, so perhaps you got that. It's something the Spanish introduced. Now the Spanish are trying to change people here. They believe that their own way of life is superior to the way that people had been living, surviving, and thriving for thousands of years. The Spanish believe that it's not a great way to live, to hunt and gather, and they are trying to make people into agriculturalists. They want people to become farmers. And this is a farming tool, so this is a sickle or rosa that would be used for harvesting barley, corn, wheat, and some of the plants that would be growing. When we think about this, and we think about all these changes happening in the society and also on the landscape, do the Spanish understand these new environments that they're entering and the ecological systems? Not so well. So a lot of this is it's experimentation, and there are a lot of examples in the mission where people are planting crops, planting seeds, and then they don't grow. The crops aren't making it. Did people starve to death? In some of the missions, that was a concern, a consideration, but in fact, people had a lot of resources to draw on because most of the people in the missions are Native people and are still bringing their traditions like this into the mission. I'm going to stand back so you can get a good look, a good view of our fox skin. For Ohlone men, traditionally, they would use a fox's skin as their quiver, a tool, a holder for arrows. And when you first come into, so people are using traditional lifeways in the mission times. They're continuing to hunt. They're continuing to gather. When you first come to the mission, your weapons would be taken away from you. If you gain the trust of the padres and show that you're following the rules in this new way of life, you can have your weapons returned. And so this is also a part of mission life. You can get a paseo, you can go hunting. If you bring back meat, the best part of it you might tithe or give to the padres. So that's a little bit of how this might work in mission times, during mission life. Any questions out there about the objects that we're seeing? All right, if you have other questions that are about mission life in general that we don't answer, hopefully I can give you a little bit of time in the end to cover some of these. All of these objects that we're looking at are replicas. So these things, including even this foxskin quiver, are not the originals that were found in the building or on the grounds, but we know about them because of the work that a group of people does. And if you know the name of the field of professional field of people who look for clues and evidence about how people lived in the past by looking at objects or artifacts. Let us know who those folks are. We have lots of documentation from the missions that tell us the historical record and the historical reports. But who was writing those records? Who were writing the diaries and the reports? Typically it was the Spanish. And that gives us a certain viewpoint and a certain lens for looking at mission life. Archaeologists, folks who study the past through these objects, they're getting answers. They're getting evidence of daily life, a lot of the stuff that people weren't writing down, and a lot of stuff that is common to the experience of the California Indian people who were in the missions, but who weren't writing down their experience and their lives. What's up, Paul? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're getting questions about killing animals, and I have noticed that when I talk to school students, some people have a really strong reaction to seeing an animal's skin, and why did they have to kill animals? And first, I just want to open up a cultural context and think about our lives today. Any of you out there, did you eat an animal this week or this month? Some of us might be vegetarians, but a lot of us in our culture today eat animals and use animals who give their lives for us to survive. And in my case, I'm wearing leather boots right here. I am a vegetarian, but I'm wearing leather boots. I'm wearing a belt that's made of leather, that's made of an animal's skin. In the world of pre-contact native people, they also used animals to survive. And what I can say about that is it's not something that they did without thought or took lightly. It was intricately connected with their spiritual practices and being in relationship with that animal and going through a spiritual formula to hunt or kill an animal was part of their practice. And when they did kill an animal, they made a point of trying to use every part of it so that it wasn't wasted. It wasn't wasteful. So those are things to think about, and to really think about our own lives too, and our relationship with animals. And if you're eating an animal, but relying on somebody else to slaughter it or kill it before we get the food, how does that play out in terms of our relationship with an animal that dies so that we can survive? Thank you for that question. Those conversations about different cultures are really, really interesting and help us, I think, get closer to understanding what life was like in the past. How are we doing, Paul? All right. Well, before we wrap it up here, I have one more artifact that I want to show you. And this one is really, it's an interesting one to me because we've looked at things that have come from Ohlone culture, right? We've looked at artifacts that come from Spanish culture and a Spanish way of life. We've looked at this blending of cultures. But there's a lot entailed in this one artifact that I'm about to pull up. And I want to make sure we can see it. Hopefully we can get close enough. All right, playing with the light and things like that. So this is a piece of ceramic, a piece of pottery. And it was broken. It might have been a plate or something like that got broken. And we find a lot of pieces of ceramic. That was a cultural artifact of mission life. But here I am looking at this, and I want to drive in some of the details. Oh, here we go. All right, so I think we can see on this that along the edge of this piece of ceramic that broke, somebody went back and worked this piece. And I see a series of little flakes of little chips along the bottom edge there where my thumb is. And these are typical of flaking shapes that we would see on a lithic piece, on a rock piece that would be used as an arrowhead or a spear point, a lithic point of some type. And here what we see are people using the same techniques. Often it's done with a deer antler to pressure flake this edge to make it sharp and to take that piece of broken pottery and reuse it, repurpose it as a new tool, perhaps a knife edge or a scraper or something like that. And so here we see, and this was done by California Indian people in the missions, and we see this example rather often, where people are taking these new materials that they weren't using in their traditional life and adapting them with their skill set and their material culture and their practices to create a new type of tool that's pretty indicative of the mission system, this mission era itself. So throughout all of the artifacts that we've seen examples of blending of culture, and within those artifacts we've seen things that come from Spain, that come from Ohlone culture or local California traditional ways, and even things that were typical of Mexico and Mesoamerican culture that all came together in one place during this era. And for the native people who live here, you can see them working to, these objects tell a story of change, of continuation, and also a story of adaptation. Hey, Paul, any questions out there? All right. So I'm so glad that you had a chance to join us today at the Santa Cruz mission. A little glimpse of some of the special stuff that we're able to pull out of our museum exhibits and share with you under these circumstances. Hopefully that provides some information if you're doing your 4th grade report that will help you tell the story of what life was like for our Native people in the mission. And hopefully we'll be able to continue this story on successive Mondays. Yes. Oh, I hope that sometime you get a chance to come to our site for a living history demonstration on cooking, or for perhaps during your class program, to eat a tortilla that was made here on an open fire. They taste really good. If you don't have a comal like this at home, don't worry. You can still make corn tortillas at your own house. And I do this all the time with my kids. The first step is the grocery store. Even our local big chains here have masa, M-A-S-A, masa para tortillas is often what it says on the packaging, masa for tortillas or tamales. And Maseca is one of the popular brands that we see a lot. And that's not corn meal, it's corn flour. It's been slaked with lime so that the pH changes and it's sort of fluffy in texture. Right there on the package, it'll give you the recipe to mix it with warm water, and those are your ingredients. The masa, the warm water, throw a pinch of salt in there. And if you don't have a special tortilla press at home, and I don't quite have the skill to make great flat tortillas with my hands, I work with my kids to use 2 cutting boards or 2 books with saran wrap in between, or the plastic that comes off of a bread wrapper, and press those, roll it into a ball, press it flat, and then use perhaps an iron frying pan, a cast iron pan, or just a regular frying pan. Use some oil if you want, and whatever you make and eat at home will be super tasty, right? And this is a time when I know a lot of families are getting opportunities to experiment with food and put more effort into cooking. Cooking from different cultures is a great way to experience history and bring it into the opportunity that we have right now.